Well, quite a number of people, like you rightly said, will be surprised that the Air Force is actually able to pull its weight here. Did we get new equipment?
Pardon?
Do you know if we got new equipment?
Not totally, not exactly aware if anything, if there have been any new procurements. I'm aware that over time and over this period there have been certain procurements, the details of which I do not have in total. That which I have, I'm not certain if it's in my place to make that type of disclosure. However, it's, as I said, we are seeing the success, we are seeing the results. And I would say that if you make the tools available,
I'm confident of the capacity of our military, whether it's the Air Force, whether it's the Army, because I can attest to the quality of training, the capacity of all our personnel to be able to do what they are supposed to do. So I'm not in any doubt that we can sustain the momentum and in fact go ahead to ensure that militarily we dismantle and degrade Boko Haram in totality.
I was going to ask you the question about sustainability, the victories so far that have been achieved, and the area of training. We had a report earlier about graduation, some of your colleagues that are graduating from the Defense Academy. Can we sustain this beyond the insurgency?
Training is something that we must continue to do. Again, we need to also be mindful that as trends evolve, as changes, as we begin to see these types of changes happen. Some years back, we had no understanding or probably not even clue that we would be taking on this type of war or this type of fight. Now it's here. And so for that reason, the military must continue to adapt to these trends, and training is a very critical aspect of this adaptation. So already there's that culture, and once there's the culture and everybody knows that this is what we are supposed to do, certainly I know we can continue to have the kind of success that we're having at this moment.
You know, following you, last year you had written something on protection of critical national assets, especially when a nation is fighting insurgents like this. So what would you love to see as we move away from the battle lines? How well do you suggest that we put in place some form of security to protect our critical national assets?
Thank you very much. I think that we are not the first people to go through this type of situation. Recall that in the U.S., following the 9/11 attacks, the U.S. had to adapt itself to this new threat. And if you remember, what they did in their own case was to set up a new department called the Homeland Security Department. Now, what they did was to consolidate several other existing agencies and bring them under one agency, develop a completely different and new blueprint for how they secured their critical national assets, how they secured their borders, how they secured their citizens. And we need to begin to have a look at that, because at the end of the day, like I said, I believe we will win the military side of this fight. However, I'm a bit concerned about what will happen if we begin to have these types of lone wolf attacks on our critical national assets, and we have quite a number of them. So for me, what needs to happen at this point is there needs to be a robust policy put in place on how we can begin to secure every single critical asset that we own as a nation. Because let me tell you the truth, we are not likely to get any less vulnerable. So we're going to continue, our vulnerability is going to continue to increase as we continue to have some of the issues we're having. economic issues will lead to, will further expose us. So it is very apparent and very imperative at this time that we take steps, deliberate steps, and we need to think through this intelligently. We need to get all necessary persons that we can to begin to sit down together and see how we can address the issue of protecting our critical national assets. And let me just say this. We have a model that is already working for us. If you look at the maritime domain, there is a model that is in place that, if adapted or if scaled up, could be beneficial in protecting the larger assets, and that's beyond the maritime domain. So we have an opportunity here, and I hope we can seize it and really begin to think through these problems and find a solution for them.
You know, bringing all of these agencies together is very key here. We have, when you talk about maritime, we have the Navy, we have NIMASA, and a couple of others that we must also bring into focus. And you did say the moment you overcome one, another threat rears its head, and we shouldn't let down our guards. That is why you're calling for a proactive action in safeguarding some of these assets. Do you think that we should take more of our men and officers and men for some specific training, or you think we already have them in the military?
It's not going to be a personnel issue. It's a lot more complex. We need a sound policy first. We need a sound policy. We need a policy that can ensure that every single asset has the requisite security measures in place. And this is regardless of what the type of attacks we are anticipating. They could be of a terrorist nature. There could be other things. In the maritime domain, we are concerned about piracy, about pipeline vandalization, oil theft. When you come further, there's the aviation side of it. You know, there are so many other things that we need to consider. Now, what I think needs to happen, that beyond the personnel, is there needs to be a concerted effort. We have agencies that are already in place and are doing different things. Everybody is doing their own bit. But what I have seen over time is that everybody operates in silos. You know, and this was the problem that the US had leading up to 9/11. They found out that different agencies had information or had critical intelligence that could have helped in forestalling or preventing the 9/11 attacks. But because there was no sharing of information, no sharing of intelligence, there was no coordination between these agencies, there were these gaps. And we are kind of in that kind of situation now. We have a situation where you have various groups doing their own bit, but there is no coordination and then there is no control, because those are the two things you would need at this point. There needs to be coordination with all the agencies responsible, and then somebody to take ownership of this thing. Like I said, in the US, that has fallen on the laps of the Department of Homeland Security. So we need to think and figure out how we want to secure our own assets going forward.
Would we need to look at issues of legislation to, besides the personnel? Do we need to look at reworking the Armed Forces Act and other legislations that might help to, how do you put it, galvanize the team the more? That would be one step. But I think beyond that, like I said, the policy has to come first. It's the policy that will determine the type of legislation we would need to have. It is that will determine the agencies that will be involved in putting together this this whole arrangement, as it were. So it needs to start with the policy. We need to have a direction on how are we going to, going forward, protect our critical national assets. And there are so many of them. Our power infrastructure, our aviation infrastructure, our maritime infrastructure, telecommunications. There's so many of these things that we need to look at and begin to have
policies in place that would ensure that adequate security measures are in place, whether in peacetime or in time of war.
Now, talking about coordinating efforts, under whose office would you say that, all of this information be shared? The United States created Homeland Security. Do we need to create another one, or do you think that we have one now that we can convert for all of these agencies to be able to share information effectively?
Mope, to be honest with you, at this point, I can't say we have an existing agency that would do what the Homeland Security, for example, Homeland Security Department in the US is doing. However, we do have a national security advisor, and that office has essentially coordinated all issues of national security, intelligence, and so that for me is a starting point. We could begin to look at that, and once we're able to sit down, because for me, there needs to be a sit down first. We need to analyze what our challenges are right now, what they will be in the next 5, 10, 20 years, and then begin to put in place the kind of structure that would ensure that we can give protection to these assets. And as I always say, the most critical assets are you and I, the Nigerian citizens. So it's a thorough thing. We need to rework our whole national security strategy, our national security policy. That is something that I feel needs to be done at this point.
All right, we'd like to thank you, retired Flight Lieutenant Jerry Ajobena, for sharing your insights with us on security matters this morning on Sunrise Daily.